Dr. Jazz.
I'll just jump in, man. I've talked with other Jason. You wanted to do it together, but I really wanted to do it separately because I also want to investigate a little bit of your playing and the records you did, and
Sure.
I really love the new Songs of Resistance, which came out what 6 years ago, and that's
Yeah.
when I first heard your name. I was like, man, okay,
Oh, wow.
that's a guy to follow. So, uh,
Cool.
but yeah,
Really,
I want to start with Sanctuary. Actually, I mean that's the
yeah.
main reason we kind of got connected. And uh, first of all, what's your story with Jason Anick? I mean, I know you guys go way, way back, I think, but like, how did you guys hook up and playing with him? And
Yeah. Well, I met him the first time I met him, we were both in high school, and
already, well,
we went to different schools. We grew up both in the suburbs of Boston, but in different towns. So we didn't have any at that time any friends in common or anything. We just met at a jam session at a coffee shop in a town called Natick, Massachusetts. And we were both just kind of getting it together. We were very young musicians, pretty new to jazz, and but we became friendly. We hit it off, and then during we went our separate ways for college. But during like winter breaks and summer breaks, we would get together to play. Sometimes do a gig here or there, but it was all very intermittent. And then later on, after college, he was in the Boston area. I was in New York. Um, he had just started teaching at Berkeley, and he called me to play some of his original music that he was planning to record, and that ended up on an album called Tipping Point, his
yeah,
Jason Anick record, Tipping Point. And uh, from then on, we started playing a lot more together. I later got hired on the faculty at Berkeley, so then even though we were in different cities, we were in the same place once per week during the school year. And so we would try to, like on a lunch break, get together and play a little bit. And that's kind of where it started to take off as colleagues at Berkeley, like at least in a more regular sense.
yeah.
But we do go all the way back to high school, and we always just found a deep musical rapport. I think he and I we're both classically trained on our instruments. We both love traditional swing and main and straight ahead jazz, but we also have this eye towards kind of alternative approaches to improvisation and genre bending and genre breaking practices. So that sort of approach is where we find common ground. Um, and yeah, we just love playing together, and it's very easy to work
Yeah,
with Jason.
sounds like it. Yeah, it's such a beautiful chemistry you have. I mean,
Thank you. Yeah.
also when you comp him, you seem to know the
Yeah.
lines.
I
Sometimes
guess.
where he'll go, and I listen like, oh,
Yes,
okay, that's
yes.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Uh,
hmm
what about the writing for the record? I mean, this was like
That's
a
a
different approach, right? I mean, because
totally. And that's where this record really diverges from our past collaborations. Like our first album, United, was I brought a handful of tunes, he brought a handful of tunes, some original and some non-original, and that was great. And we just basically played the tunes that we would play on a gig at that time. But this, almost immediately after releasing that, we said it'd be fun to do a record of all or nearly all original music that we co-write together
mm,
specifically for our quintet. And we became really enamored with the sound of a quintet that was violin and trumpet front line, almost like the violin taking the space of the saxophone.
yeah, yeah,
And it just dawns on me. Jason Anick has told me that in terms of his development of his improvisational language, he transcribed a lot of saxophone players.
yeah.
I
He
remember him talking
transcribed
about
Parker, right? Charlie Parker and stuff like that. He told
Charlie
me, yeah,
Parker,
yeah, yeah,
Sonny Stitt, I
yeah,
think he was into, and um, so I didn't even make that connection till now. But maybe that's one way in which that quintet setup really works. But I also think it's kind of a novel sound, like the
yeah.
brass and the strings
Yeah,
together,
yeah.
but in a jazz setting. So what we did was it was almost like one of us would start a tune and then email the score file to the other person. The other person would finish it, like write the bridge or the ending or the second half, however it came out, and maybe do some light arranging, and then send it back to the first person, and the first person would arrange it further. And then when we finally found like a mutual lunch break at Berkeley, we would get together and play it together and see how it felt and make further tweaks. So it was really
Interesting.
cool, different kind of, I think in the pop world, there's a lot more
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
compositional collaboration, which is cool. And I'd never really done it in a jazz setting. I mean, of course, it's very collaborative. Like when I bring one of my originals to a rehearsal, I love when the other band members make suggestions or have ideas. And in that sense, it is collaborative, but not at this stage of the writing
Composing.
process. Like
Yeah.
like we would deliberately not finish a tune, send it to the other person and have them kind of complete it. And so we ended up writing music that I don't think either one of us would have ever written on our own.
Yeah, must have been a surprise, right? That you got
Totally.
like a B
Yeah,
section, like, wow, I would never go there or something like that. I mean,
never, never.
interesting.
But Jason is really yeah, he always surprised me, but it was always tasteful. Like there was nothing that I felt like I had to veto, and he likewise, he never vetoed me. It was we always dug what the other person did. Again, easy to work with because I guess we have differing but compatible aesthetics musically.
No, it's a nice approach. I've never done it. I mean, it's
Yeah, I recommend it. I mean,
yeah,
it
yeah.
probably
No,
goes
I'm
differently
quite
with every
curious.
person, but it's kind of cool.
I think if you compose your, I mean, that's my problem sometimes. You compose and then you're stuck many times with kind of the same things that you do. I mean, that's your language, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm always like, ah, shit, another tune in 7/4 or
yeah.
another kind of vampy vibe or like, and I think that's a nice way to just screw
And
up a
also
little bit your mind, to put it like that.
collaborating with a non-rhythm section
Yeah,
person
yeah,
who might think differently about all the different roles in the band.
yeah,
And like Jason's harmonic sensibility is completely different than mine in a really cool way.
yeah,
And that has to be, I would guess that's influenced by a lot of things, but principally the fact that he plays violin and I play piano.
yeah, 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 yeah. Beautiful. How do you compose otherwise? I mean, I wanted to ask you about the Unstuck in Time record because
Oh,
I
sure.
studied literature and I'm really
Oh,
curious when
cool.
people deal with literature and music. Like, how did that inspire you to write, or like, because it's easy, like say, okay, I was inspired by this. You just
I know.
you could just
Yeah.
like, but how did you really? I mean, how did you approach that one?
Yeah, on Unstuck in Time, it sort of varied on piece to piece. And even though the process of adapting the literature or using the literature for the music, even if the process was different on each piece, I call it a suite because
Yeah.
there were these musical motifs that kept popping up almost without my realizing it. In some cases, it was intentional, like the final piece on Unstuck in Time, which is called Trafalmadorian
Hmm.
Rhapsody. I intentionally took motifs from other tunes in the suite, but in those other pieces I didn't do that, and nevertheless there were things that lined up. Well, just to give a couple of examples,
Yeah.
sometimes I would use um, uh, onomatopoeia, like taking the
Yeah.
sound of a particular
Oh, okay.
phrase and transcribing the rhythms and assigning notes to those rhythms. So there's this song on the record called Kilgore's Creed. There's a famous character in Kurt Vonnegut's books named Kilgore Trout, who is like a failed science fiction writer, and he's supposed to be an alter ego for Vonnegut, like a humorous alter ego. And he shows up in many different books. And in one book, he has a creed where he tells people, you were sick, but now you're well again, and there's work to do. So on this song, Kilgore's Creed, you hear the band recite that creed, and then the melody they play is those words. Like the
Okay.
melody matches the words, that phrase.
Interesting.
But I
Okay.
didn't do that with every song. There's one called well, I did that with several. I was going to use one that so there's one called Unk's Fate that uses a rhythm that Vonnegut basically writes out in words what a military march sounds like.
Okay. Yeah.
The words he uses, I then transcribe that to a rhythm. But the but that wasn't that's maybe the rhythmic underpinning, but the melody and the introduction of Unk's Fate are it's basically my imagining a scene that he describes taking place on the planet Mars. So I use like these big open fifths to evoke the vastness of space, things like that. So that in that sense,
Interesting. Okay.
that approach is a little like film scoring-ish. So on the one hand, there's dealing with the language concretely. On another hand, there's like sort of imagining it as a film and how I would accompany the film. In
Interesting.
a
Okay.
couple of them, it's a little more abstract, like I'm doing a character portrait. Like, what is my feeling about this character's vibe or personality? And that's harder to define. That's a little more vague. That's a more like, oh, it was inspired by. But
Yeah,
but
yeah,
it really
but
is,
still interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm always curious about that, like,
Yeah,
painting or poetry or whatever. Like, how do you deal with that? How do you see
I
it?
know.
Or, um,
I kind of made it up as I went along. I had never done anything quite like it. So,
yeah, interesting. Uh, Jason, you mentioned you grew up like near the Boston area, and
yeah,
obviously, there is Berkeley and
yeah,
NEC and all this
yeah.
amazing. What got you into jazz? I mean, what's the story there? Was
Yeah,
it like a aha moment one day, or
yes and no. I basically, in retrospect, kind of an aha moment, but it didn't feel like an aha moment at the time. Um, when I started piano lessons as a kid, about age 7, and I enjoyed playing the piano, but I didn't like practicing what my teacher gave me. I would tend to uh, goof off, which I later learned was improvising, but I didn't know it was serious because it was the thing I was told not to do. I should be practicing my Clementi or my, kids' piano pieces or whatever. Um, and but there was a turning point at which I seriously really didn't like my lesson. Oh, no, before I didn't like my lessons, this came first. I started writing my own music, like creating my own songs when I was like 8 or 9. They didn't really have a genre. I don't, be hard to describe what they sounded like. They might have been influenced a little bit by classic rock because that's what I like to listen to at that time. But uh, finally, when I became a little disillusioned with piano lessons, my mom actually found this wonderful piano teacher in the Boston area. His name's Dan Lotion. I just saw him last weekend, actually. We had a
mm,
really nice visit. Um, and he had a degree in classical piano and a degree in jazz piano, and he was equally comfortable with teaching both. So my parents liked that I would continue
mm.
my classical studies, but jazz was kind of the only other option that you could take lessons in. And I didn't really know much about jazz. I knew a little bit about the blues. I liked the blues. Um, and but what I learned through Dan was that improvisation wasn't just goofing off. It was this beautiful art form and this discipline that you could dive into. And there was this whole amazing history of artists. And I remember he gave me a cassette tape because it was the days of cassette tapes with Miles Davis and Art Blakey and Horace Silver and those types of people, Oscar Peterson.
Yeah.
And I became really, it wasn't like, I wasn't instantly enamored with the music so much as I was super curious. I was like, what is going on? I don't really get it yet. And then as I started investigating it, I fell in love with it.
Hmm.
It's interesting. And I definitely fell in love with the idea that, oh, I can improvise and that counts. That's legitimate form of music making. It's really interesting to think back about how our Western paradigm
Yeah.
so privileges the written music over the orally learned or improvised music, and I think that's a value hierarchy that jazz somewhat succumbs to in certain circles, but it also pushes back against being a Black American art form. It's
Mm.
like no, there's this other orally and orally learned tradition that is super valid and super profound and relevant and so yeah, that's a long-winded way. I found a great teacher. I mean
Mm.
that was kind of what drew me in. And then I had a wonderful teacher in high school, Bob Sinecrope, who ran this jazz program at Milton Academy, where I
Mm.
went to high school. Some other jazz artists have come through. It's not an arts high school, but he started this jazz program. The other alums include the pianist Aaron Goldberg and
Mm.
the
Oh,
saxophonist Steve Lehman.
yeah.
So he really provided amazing opportunities for students, both those of us who like were serious about it and others who they were just exploring it. everyone was welcome. He didn't hold auditions and yet was able to get this high level of
level. Yeah.
performance, which was cool. Um, yeah, so those two guys were my principal early mentors, in playing jazz.
Did you then go like the usual path, like going back to Art Tatum or even earlier, and like Bill Evans and all these guys, and or like who were the piano players that you said like, wow,
Well,
shit,
the
these are
first
amazing.
ones, yeah, through Dan Lotion, the first ones, it was like, yeah, I would say, um, uh, definitely Bill
Mm.
Evans, a little bit of Oscar Peterson, but heavy on the Bill Evans, and then, but he also hit me to Thelonious Monk and Bud Powell, who became real touchstones for me,
Mm. Yeah.
um, and Chick Corea, Herbie Hancock, Keith Jarrett. It was more kind of on my own that I got interested in the pre-bebop guys later, like probably in my late teens and 20s. Fats Waller, Art Tatum, Earl Hines more in my
Oh yeah.
30s, really, like more recently, and Hank Jones. So those were some of my guys, but really Monk is a touchstone. Bill Evans, Bud Powell, those guys.
Mm. Where did you study then? Was it in New York or in Boston or?
It was in Boston, so I did a
Oh, okay.
joint program at Tufts University and New England Conservatory. So I was studying jazz piano at NEC and international relations at Tufts.
Oh
So
wow.
like I
Okay.
had an
Interesting.
academic major. And then later, after I joined the faculty at Berkeley, this was after I moved to New York, but I was commuting to teach 2 days a week at Berkeley. I went back for a master's at Berkeley at the Global Jazz Institute,
Mm.
uh, artistically directed by Danilo Perez.
But
So,
okay.
yeah, but that was more, that was like in my early 30s. I did that. I went back a little later, and that's actually where New
Interesting.
Songs of Resistance had its
Yeah,
just,
yeah. I just
yeah,
wanted to make this connection. Yeah, probably. I mean,
yes, yes,
interesting. Yeah, well, I want to ask you about that record later, but uh,
sure.
how did you decide to move to New York, and how was that like for you? I mean, it's crazy there, as we all know, like to make a name, make a living,
It
get
is.
gigs, make connections. How was that
You
like?
know, it's funny. I I sort of knew by the last year of college that, I had these two paths in front of me. I had the international relations, and I was very interested in politics and public policy, but I was very passionate about the music, obviously, and I sort of felt like, of the two paths, the music is what I feel in my heart more, and it's what I also feel like, um, is the most uncertain or the least structured, and I should make a real go for that while I'm young and can live the starving artist life a little bit,
Yeah,
and don't have attachments. I felt like, a lot of my friends had already been moving to New York from Boston. So that was helpful. That's how I found a great roommate situation when I moved to New York. I just moved in with friends from Boston and had a community. So that part of it on a personal, social level was smooth. But yeah, it was hard to get gigs, hard to get students. It took many months to start to get my feet on the ground.
sure.
It's really hard, but I loved that first year, and I loved the challenge of it, and I'm really glad I did it because it's really opened up my horizons musically and personally.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. But you immediately started leading bands, right? I know that Inner Circle album that you did, like that's quite
that's
early actually.
true. Yeah, well,
How did
that
that
and
happen? I mean,
the first Inner Circle record, I recorded in Boston, like,
okay.
but like 2 months before or a month before I moved to New York.
Mm,
So it did come out while I was already in New York. And I met Greg Osby in Boston through my friend Aubrey Johnson, a wonderful singer. He was teaching at Berkeley at the time, and she introduced me to him. So when I sent him some of the music, he was really enthusiastic and signed me up. And but uh, but yeah, I mean, while I was doing some gigs, like especially off the ground, like band leader gigs in New York City, jazz band leader gigs are, you have to pay the sidemen, of
yeah, it's
course.
yeah,
And so often I wouldn't make any money from those. It was rough goings in the early days. Things have changed, I'm happy to say. Like, you know, it seems to, I mean, I'm just one person, but it seems to get better the longer you're here, the more
Yeah,
people you work with. Um, it takes a lot of patience and persistence, but eventually you get gigs that, will pay your bills and can and um, help out. And you
yeah,
cobble together between teaching and playing
sure.
private events. It's not all creative music all the time, and
Of
that's
course.
okay.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
okay.
Was the band leading aspect easy for you in the beginning already? Like, I mean, like, was it natural, or how
That's a
did you
great
learn the
question.
craft of band leading? I'll put it
I
like
think
that.
I learned a lot just by doing it. I mean, I think I co-led a band in high school, a jazz band in high school, and then I had a couple different bands in college, a sextet
Mm,
and a trio. And in both cases, those bands had older musicians that I invited to play
that's
in my
important. Yeah,
group, and I learned a lot from them. I learned a lot from people like Mark Zaleski, a wonderful saxophone player, from a wonderful bass player named Tal Gamlieli, who was in my trio. Just to give a couple of examples, they I don't know, just watching them lead their own projects and then
mm,
have them in my band and sort of give me advice. Uh, that was really useful, but I'm not sure how I learned it, other than just doing it.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
And also experiencing, I still do mostly sideman gigs, as a practical matter. So I see a lot of different band leaders and I learn a lot from them, like how they operate.
yeah, yeah. You have.
Or talking with my fellow sidemen who tell me stories about other bands they're in that I'm not even in, and I hear about how those band leaders operate. And I think over time, you sort of subconsciously collect all this information about, like, okay, that's a good way to do things. That's not a good way to do things, and
Yeah,
you make mistakes and you learn from
yeah,
those
yeah.
too.
Obviously, yeah.
Yeah,
You mentioned Danilo before, and
yeah,
how important was he? Obviously there's a connection with New Songs of Resistance, and
yeah,
how come you decided to go there? I mean, it's quite your records are quite diverse, like you said before.
yeah,
And like, but that one particularly, I mean, which, like I said,
yeah,
that's when I heard your name. Like, what's the story behind that one? And
yeah. Well, Danilo and I go back a ways. I've known him almost 20 years
wow,
actually,
really? Okay.
because when I was at New England Conservatory, he was on the faculty there. And he was my primary piano teacher for four
Oh,
years.
really? Okay.
So I spent the most um, direct time with him in those formative years. And a lot of what he taught me was really amazing nuts and bolts bebop and stuff coming out of the Barry Harris School. He also taught me some more abstract thinking about um, improvisation and music making stuff he was picking up from Wayne.
Wayne,
When I
sure. Yeah.
started working with him, he was like he had been in Wayne Shorter's quartet for maybe 3 or 4 years. Um, and it was really thrilling to like have them put out a new Wayne Shorter record. I go listen to it and then go talk to Danilo about it. It was like
Exactly. Yeah, how he approaches it. And yeah, that's amazing.
totally a thrill. And um, but Danilo was a wonderful mentor in those years. So then when I was thinking about going back for a master's, I was teaching at Berkeley, so it was logistically the simplest to do my master's there. But I looked at a number of programs. What the Global Jazz Institute really presented to me was an opportunity to bring together um, my interests in social justice and
Yeah.
politics with not that it's overtly political, but there's a whole mission statement about using music as a tool for social change, and that really resonated with me. Um, and studying that in the context of a creative, open performance um, degree.
Mm,
Even though it's a performance degree, everybody in the program is composing, writing, band leading, recording during the program. So there's a lot of like self-direction in it and the opportunity to develop your own stuff. And so my thesis project was on the Nueva Canción
yeah.
movement, Latin American songwriters. And my proposal for my final project was to reimagine and reorchestrate a handful of those songs and also write companion pieces with contemporary themes that adapted musical motifs
Yeah.
from the originals. And Danilo said, you could call it New Songs of Resistance because Nueva Canción means new song. And I was like, that's a great title. So that was my final project. And then
Okay.
I tried not to put, I was just trying to get my degree and not put too much pressure on myself. But I put my best effort in and I said, if this recording session goes really well, I love this music, it would be fun to release it as a record. And fortunately, it did go very well. And I went back a few months later to record like 3 more short pieces to kind of fill out the record. And then I released it on Outside In Music,
Yeah,
and really proud of that work. I mean, it was like a
that's a beautiful record too.
milestone for me. Thank you. And the I learned a lot. I had 2 of my Berkeley colleagues, but they're also kind of mentors to me in the rhythm section.
Yeah,
Huergo on bass, who
yeah,
Argentine bass player. He plays a lot with Guillermo
Guillermo.
Klein's
Yeah,
squad,
yeah.
and Mark Walker, who plays with Oregon, and Paquito de Rivera, and he played with the late great Lyle Mays a bunch. So those guys really were tremendous, and the rest of the band were all graduate and undergraduate students at Berkeley at
Ah,
that time.
okay. Yeah, I
But
didn't recognize
totally,
any of the other names. Yeah, I mean, I know those two
totally
guys, obviously.
awesome,
Yeah, yeah,
totally awesome, and they're all now making their way as up and coming artists, and
yeah, yeah.
yeah, really grateful for their help. So.
Beautiful. Yeah. Have you been preparing something new as a band leader, like aside the Sanctuary project lately, or I mean, or do you have some plans for?
That's a great question. I don't have in the immediate future anything planned, um, but I just had a gig with my trio last night at a great venue in Brooklyn called Bar Bayou. Uh, it's the same rhythm section as Unstuck in Time. It's Danny
Okay.
Keller and Jay Sawyer, and it really felt great playing with them. So one thing I'd like to do in the next couple of years is a purely trio record, which technically I've never done, even though my first 2 records were called Jason Yeager Trio. They had special guests and
Yeah.
stuff. Um, and my wife, Julie Benko, is a Broadway actress and singer who also sings jazz really well. And she has a project that focuses on New Orleans and traditional
Oh,
jazz.
beautiful.
And we're going to do a gig at Birdland in New York City on February 10th, celebrating Mardi Gras. It's our third
Oh, wow,
year.
really? Oh, interesting.
Yeah, our third year doing this, and it's a lot of fun. I did all the arrangements. It's a 7-piece band, um, and so even though it's not like I'm not the leader per se, I'm sort of the musical director, arranger, and Julie and I would really like to record that music at some point.
Beautiful.
Whether it happens this year or next, I don't know, but that's something that will feel like, very close to my heart, of course.
Hmm.
So
How do you guys work together? I mean, does she compose as well, your wife? Because,
she does.
I talked with Steve Swallow and, how him and Carla worked, or many
Oh,
other
that's fascinating. Yeah,
other musicians. Like, do you help each other when composing or when doing stuff? Or,
totally.
yeah?
Yeah, oftentimes like she when she writes a song or songs, um she will write mostly from a melodic and lyrical
Mm,
standpoint.
sure.
And but her melodies, I think especially because she comes from a theater background and her pitch is so precise, like her melodies are so strong that the I almost feel like I hear what the chords are supposed to be. Like there's
Mm,
not that much work for me to do. So I sort of help her arrange the tunes, flesh them out for a band. So I'm kind of her arranger. So in that way, I help out. On the flip side, while she and I haven't, we did actually co-compose one piece. It was a piece that we were commissioned to write for the Park Avenue Synagogue in New York City for Passover this past year.
mhm.
And she took a lesser known Bible story um, uh, about the parting of the Red Sea. That's very famous. But what's not very well known is that there's a character in the Bible named Nachshon.
Mhm.
I'm not saying it very well, Nachshon, but he is apparently ordered. I forget if it's Moses who tells him or God who tells him, walk into the sea. The sea is gonna part, but you have to go. Just have faith. And he walks in a little bit, and it doesn't part. He takes one more step, it doesn't part. He takes one more, and he's all the way up to his neck. And oh, and by the way, this dude can't swim. And he gets all the way up to his neck with the Egyptians approaching behind, and then finally the waters part.
Mm.
So the contemporary humanist interpretation, it's about having faith in yourself that you just take one step forward, one at a time, you know. And Julie wrote a beautiful song that I co-wrote with her. We sort of sat together at the piano and worked it out.
Oh, beautiful.
So we do collaborate. Yeah.
Nice. That's nice always. Yeah. Beautiful. What are your plans with Sanctuary for this upcoming year? I mean, you know, some tours. Are you guys do you guys have any plans to come to Europe, or I mean, or you as with your own bands, or
Yeah, no plans as of yet for Europe, although that would be something we'd love to do.
yeah.
There are two complicating factors. One is my wife and I just had a baby in late November.
Congrats.
Thank you.
I know
Her
where
name,
you are then. Okay.
yes, you do. You're actually where Jason is because Jason has a 2-year-old.
Yeah, yeah.
Mine. So he has a young boy at home. We have a young baby girl,
Oh yeah.
Lulu. So we're taking it a little bit slow, but Jason and I are doing a concert in New York City together just as a duo where we're going to feature some of the music from
Oh,
Sanctuary.
beautiful.
It's a double bill at Carnegie Hall on April 23rd. Very excited about that. We're actually playing with another piano violin duo. Um, and it's going to be great. It's in the recital hall there. It's a little more
Hmm.
intimate. It's called Weil Recital Hall. Um, so that's our next thing on the docket, and we're hoping that um, as Lulu gets a little bit older, we'll be able to do some short tours around the country
Yeah.
um, in different regions, and then at some point Europe would be great. And Jason, in addition to his modern jazz proclivities, is an outstanding jazz manouche player,
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
like the Stefan Grappelli Django Reinhardt thing. And I've accompanied him on some of that stuff.
Oh, really?
Uh,
Okay.
and
Cool, cool.
just on gigs, like we'll mix all the projects together occasionally, and so sometimes those tunes will come up. But so who knows? We should probably get to France and Belgium at some point, as well as Slovenia. We should get there too.
Man, yeah. You know,
Yeah.
drop me a line if you're near, and
Okay,
maybe
I
I can
will.
hook you
I
up with
will.
some, you know, promoters or whatever. So if you're gonna be
Thank
close.
you for that. Well, you have if that works out, we'll have to play. You'll have to sit
Oh
in the
man, yeah, we have to
yeah.
improvise or do whatever.
Yes,
I have a piano
indeed.
here, so
Great.
cool, man. I let you look good. You look, by the way, really good for having a 2-month-old daughter.
Yeah,
I
it's all
remember I was
about
completely
maintaining
gone, man. Yeah,
it's all about maintaining that facade. What you can't see is my pajama
yeah,
pants.
yeah, exactly.
You know what I'm saying? So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I
But
put this on just for this interview, you know.
that's good. But no, man, thanks for sharing some of these thoughts and stories. You know, I appreciate it. And
Thank you so much for the great questions and for taking the time to talk with me about Sanctuary and
yeah,
various
beautiful.
projects.
And let me know if you're in Europe. I'll drop you a line when this one is out as well. And if you're gonna be in Europe, just let me know and
I will
we can
absolutely do
hook
that.
up or something. So
That'd be great. And all the best to you and your family
you
and your
too.
little one.
You too.
Thanks.
Cool. Jason, take care.
Take care.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.
Dr. Jazz.